es historia lo que estamos escribiendo en este momento, una historia nueva para Colombia, para América Latina, para el mundo. Queremos que Colombia, y será la prioridad de la política diplomática, se coloque al frente en el mundo de la lucha contra el cambio climático.
Right, you were listening, of course, to the newly elected President Gustavo Petro of Colombia, speaking just after his victory was announced, promising widespread change in that country. You're watching Daily Debrief, coming to you from the People's Dispatch studios in New Delhi. I'm Siddhant Dani, and today we're talking about elections, of course, in Colombia and France, as well as what's happening in Germany with regard to coal power plants. First up, the left-wing candidate Gustavo Petro has won Colombia's presidential elections on Sunday, the first ever by a progressive candidate in the country's history. The former mayor of Colombia's capital, Bogota, who was also a member of the M19 guerrilla movement, has vowed profound social and economic change in the traditionally conservative Colombian society. Petro took just over 50% of the votes in narrowly defeating populist construction millionaire Rodolfo Hernandez in the runoff. In Colombia, where successive governments have long followed US diktats and anti-people economic policies, the Petro campaign was built on promises to address widespread social and economic inequality. Colombia's presidential elections has continued the pink tide in Latin America and was quickly praised by left-wing and progressive leaders across the region and around the world. For more information on what happened on Sunday and what lies ahead, People's Dispatch's Prashant is in studio now. Prashant, what are the expectations that the Colombians have dealing with, decades-long armed conflict and moving away from all of that? What are the expectations on the new Petro government?
Right. So domestically, this is it's a historic moment. It can't be stated how, and it's difficult to actually emphasize how important this is for Colombia, because for the first time in the country's history, we have a leader who's explicitly committed to a completely different policy path than what his predecessors have followed. Now, this is the case with respect to how the state is structured. This is the case in terms of economic policies, in terms of social policies, in terms of the rampant militarization of the state itself. So we do know that Colombia has seen decades, and especially the last 10 to 15 years of immense violence perpetrated especially by right-wing groups. In 2016, the Havana Accords were signed, which were meant to sort of end the armed conflict between the government and groups like the FARC. However, what has happened has been there's been this flowering of or a major increase in right-wing military violence. We've seen social leaders, we've seen activists, we've seen demobilized combatants of the FARC group, all of whom have been relentlessly targeted by these right-wing militias, which have been given complete impunity by the state. So that's on one hand. On the other hand, we have seen years and years of policies, tax reforms, a number of other policies which have consistently destroyed the economic policies which have destroyed the social structure of Colombia itself. They have been very fiercely resisted by trade unions, by people's movements. In 2021, there was a massive protest against tax reform bill by the previous president Ivan Duque, the current president Ivan Duque, who's going to leave office. He's leaving with 80% unpopularity rating, so you can guess how bad the situation was. And there were these massive protests, there was police violence. So not only were these kind of policies being pursued by the right-wing governments, there was also severe repression against anybody who raised their voices against it. Students, trade unionists, activists, anybody who raised their voice suffered a huge amount of state violence. So and paramilitary violence as well. So this is the context in which Colombia is today. And what Gustavo Petro and his running, his vice presidential candidate Francia Marquez, again a very historic an Afro-Colombian woman becoming the vice president for the first time, historic moment. What they have actually brought to the table is a completely different way of organizing the state, a focus on agriculture, a focus on strengthening the public sector. So many things, which might there is a possibility of bringing about a completely different kind of Colombian state, which is much more pro-people, which takes into account the needs of the indigenous sectors, which takes into account the need of the poor, which takes into account the need of the working class of Colombia. All that is the possibilities are quite huge, and this is a very pivotal moment because the right wing has suffered a blow. They are definitely going to try everything in their capacity to prevent the the implementation of such policies, because once such policies are implemented, people see what they benefit out of it, then it kind of grows, right? So both on the economic and in the social front, there is a huge challenge before Gustavo Petro and Francia Marquez. The parliament is already in a bit of a logjam. There is no clear majority, so they're going to have some troubles. But nonetheless, if they are able to move forward with the agenda that they promised during these elections, which is a much more welfare-driven agenda, which is a much more people-centric agenda, that might be able to transform, Colombia and make it known for something other than what it is generally known for, which is the kind of violence, which is the kind of, say, the drug trade and drug trafficking, all these issues, which have been allowed to thrive by successive right-wing governments. So a very historic moment there, but let's be very clear, a lot of challenges ahead for this combination of Gustavo Petro and Francia Marquez. They will really have to struggle to even push one bit of their agenda, because the right-wing, this is a blow to the right-wing that is very unprecedented, and it's taking place in Colombia, where they've been so entrenched for decades.
Right. We were mentioning briefly the pink tide in Latin America, whether it's Argentina, Mexico, Bolivia, Chile, Peru, Honduras, move away from the right, even if it is just populist. How do you see this sort of trend in the context of the entire Latin American region?
Right. So as far as Latin America and Central America are concerned, this is again a very important moment, because Colombia has been the frontline state of the United States in implementing its agenda, in sort of persecuting or targeting countries like Venezuela and Cuba, for that matter, or Nicaragua, for that matter, where Colombia has probably been one of the most faithful allies of the United States in its policies. And we know of the Lima group, which existed mainly to encircle Venezuela and deny it any kind of space in that region. But what we're seeing right now, as you said, is that there's been a shift from those times, from say 2016 or 2017 or 18, when the right wing seemed to be in ascendant across Latin America. We're definitely seeing a shift right now. Brazil elections coming up in a few months. That will be a very, very significant moment if Lula da Silva wins. That basically almost completes that arc. So there are a lot of differences between these leaders. Let's be clear. It's not that Nicolas Maduro or Luis Arce in Bolivia are comparable to a Gabriel Boric or an Alberto Fernandez, for that matter. There's also AMLO in Mexico, also equally part of that. But in general, what they've tried to bring together is a rejection of the US agenda in the region. There's been a broad consensus against it. Now, it may vary from country to country how much they're in opposition to it. And how much they engage or refuse to engage with the United States it varies from country to country.
Right.
And we saw this most recently in the Summit of Americas, where AMLO, for instance, boycotted the summit. Certain others attended the summit, but issued strong statements against it. Also, this is also a trend we are seeing in the Caribbean region. So broadly, what we are seeing, I think, is each of these policies indicating a rejection of, the attempts by the United States to basically keep Latin America as its backyard or frontier, or what Joe Biden was
determining
saying.
how these countries...
Exactly. Now, in many cases, we need to understand that the policies of the United States policies are basically also what is driving instability in many of these countries, right? So both the economic and social policies pushed by the US and its imperialist moves in the region are what is causing a lot of the chaos. In fact, US policies are also influencing the massive migration waves that are taking place in the region. And the fact that the US has so far been determined and has always been insistent on denying the sovereignty of these countries, or pushing them in so many ways, has contributed to the economic mess as well. So each of these countries has an opportunity to sort of try and push back a bit. Let's be clear, the space is limited, because globally, the way the global economy is structured, it is still very difficult for Latin American countries, or countries anywhere in the world, to sort of exercise their sovereignty, economic sovereignty, especially in the way they want to. Massive government spending becomes difficult because many of them are beholden to international lending agencies. Many of them face issues of debt. So there is a limit to how much, in terms of policies, many of these governments can implement or push. But nonetheless, it's kind of good to see the arc that we are seeing. And in the coming months, is there a possibility of a greater regional cooperation? We know that there are organizations like CELAC, UNASUR, for instance, which have grown in relevance in recent times, as more and more governments have moved away from this pro-US direction. And if, again, like I said, if Lula wins, we might see some more strengthening of this sort. The true anchor of this will be much more regional economic integration. That remains to be, how much that will take place is a very important question. Because at the political level, statements are important, gestures are important, but it is only true economic integration which can actually transform the continent and distance it from US policies. So whether that will happen is really the big question. So let's see how it goes.
Thanks very much for that perspective on what is clearly a very important election, not just for Colombia, but for the entire region. A significant election in France next up, where allies of the French President Emmanuel Macron are now hustling to cobble together a working parliamentary majority in hopes of salvaging his second term in the Élysée Palace. The centrist Ensemble coalition crumbled in the country's parliamentary elections in the wake of surges from both the left and the far right. Though the Macron-led coalition emerged as the single largest party in the elections, it fell well short of the parliamentary majority it enjoyed for the past 5 years. Domestic issues will now likely be a major distraction for Macron, who has tried to position himself as a key player in putting an end to the Russia-Ukraine war and as a European statesman. People's Dispatch's Abdul has been following the story and the elections. He joins me in studio now. Abdul, good to have you here. Abdul, the leftist Noobs coalition led by the firebrand Jean-Luc Mélenchon has gained a great deal and is the largest opposition sort of party in parliament now. How is this likely to affect domestic policy making in France?
I think this will have a massive impact given the fact that the agenda of the left front and the Macron's coalition are completely opposite. One wants to increase the retirement age, one wants to decrease it, one wants to freeze the prices, one wants to cut the government spending. So these are two contradictory policy lines, and that basically that means, particularly when the Macron's party does not have majority, it will have to make a lot of compromises on its position, and those compromises, of course, will be, to some extent, may be dictated by the left's position. That is the most possible scenario. But I think there is a catch to it also. If the Republicans, if Macron is able to create a working alliance with the Republicans, which have enough seats to kind of create a majority government, then the left's influence, at least in the decision making, may be less. But the number of seats it has got in the parliament means that in the popular perception, in the larger opposition front, the left will be playing much more active, proactive role.
Yeah. The other major development, of course, has been the far right and Marine Le Pen's National Rally Party gaining almost a tenfold increase in the number of seats they've won in parliament. What do you attribute this rise to?
So far, I can only think of Le Pen's efforts in last many years. If you see, during the presidential election, she got around 40 plus percentage of votes. That has to convert into some other. So this parliamentary election provided that opportunity. This election, apart from other things, makes one thing clear, that the voters, whoever came out to vote, which is not very impressive, around 46% voters came out and voted, they voted strictly according to their ideological position and their party line. Unlike in the presidential election where there were compulsions, because those who were in the right, those who were in the moderate left, they had to vote for, or the left had to vote for Macron's presidency. This time, they decided to stick to their parties, and that is the result which is showing. Since her party got 40% vote, it means that was hardcore right-wing vote. That has to convert, and that this time it got converted into positions, which did not happen in the earlier elections, for the simple reason that in the last presidential election, you see her vote were not that impressive. So I think that is one thing. Apart from Macron's policies, which he has followed for last 5 years, which has kind of created a anti-Macron constituency, and that constituency also basically voted for the right wing. Apart from that, a section of the left voters, left in a sense, the working class voters, who are completely, you can say, disillusioned by Macron's neoliberal economic policies, which even now, after facing all the problems in last 5 years, he wants to make it more rapid, make it more deeper, the neoliberal economic policies, which basically antagonizes a section of the people who usually are moderate in terms of their outlook. But they want somehow to kind of restrict this kind of vehement neoliberal flow of the Macron's party. And that basically, that section also could have voted Le Pen's, the ultra-right wings. So that kind of explains why her party was able to gain a tenfold increase in in her seats. Apart from that, I will also, it should also be underlined that the left's performance, because it was in the opinion polls and other thing, it was quite obvious that left is going to surge massively. That basically created a section of the right wing which usually did not come out to vote earlier. They came out and voted for the right wing parties. So all these things, combination of all these scenarios have contributed in the emergence of the right wing in France in this election.
Just to conclude very quickly, if you can, over the next 5 years, then do you see a further sort of fragmentation of French polity?
Of course, that is going to happen. No alliance, whether it will be, though they will try to create an alliance between the Republican Party, given the fact the Republican Party had shown a stake in the French politics, and ensemble after Macron will be looking for, because this is his second term, he will not continue after that. So that basically will create a possibility of some kind of permutation and combination in the French politics, which will lead to emergence of some new groups.
All right. Germany's economy minister has said that the country will limit the use of natural gas for electricity production after concerns over supplies from Russia. Instead, it's going to be firing up more coal plants, thermal plants, for electricity generation, at least in the short term. Russian state giant Gazprom sharply reduced the flows of natural gas in its pipelines to Western Europe due to what it called maintenance and repair work. Berlin's temporary recourse to coal marks a turnaround for Chancellor Olaf Scholz's ruling coalition of Social Democrats, Greens and the Liberal FDP, which has vowed to wind down coal usage by 2030. Abdul, what impact is this move, however temporary it might be, what impact is it likely to have on Europe?
There are many things. First, Germany, which is the largest economy on the continent, is going to shift to coal, which is completely against the European politics attempt to shift to greener resources and all. So that basically will have the larger impact on the environmental politics, given the fact that the Green is one of the members of the coalition, which decided to shift to coal. So that the environmental politics of the continent is going to face a bigger challenge in the coming days with this decision. Apart from that, and other things, one major impact of this decision will be the other countries in the region will also take cue from what Germany is doing, and they will try to shift to immediate or at least intermediate basis towards the coal and other fossil fuel based production. It means the overall politics on the continent will shift towards away from the green, which in other countries, for example in France, in other smaller countries in Europe, had seen a surge in recent years. So that is one major thing. Apart from that, this decision shows the importance of the Russian supplies. Though the European Union has tried to stitch deals with Israel and is looking forward to have similar deals with other alternative sources of alternative suppliers of gas and other oil and gas, I don't think that is working, and that is the reason that this is happening. It means other countries will have the understanding that the alternative to Russian energy resources at this moment is difficult to come by. It may increase the already inflationary pressure on the gas and oil and gas in the region. It means further complications in their domestic politics. So far, though on surface it looks like some setback on environmental advancement, but it also has larger economic and political implication for the European continent.
Right, just sticking with that for a bit longer, winter is approaching. In a few months we'll be in winter, so the levels of energy consumption in Europe, at least domestic energy consumption, will increase, the demands will increase. So are we likely to see, you mentioned it briefly, that other countries will also sort of take heed from this or follow what Germany is doing? What sort of precedent does it set for the rest of Europe?
As I said before, there is nothing, it is quite clear, since the fact that Germany is the, you can say, the country in this continent which basically sets a lots of standards. And hence, if the Germany is forced to shift and is not able to secure enough supplies from other countries for its own even today's need, you are talking about winter, today's need, the reserves has come down to, as per the news, gas reserves in the country has come down to 57%. Expected reserves should be 90%. It means it's a huge crisis looming at the face of the Europe, and therefore they will have to basically take some measures at this moment, particularly given the lack of alternative at this moment. They were looking towards Iranian resources. Iran is not is not happening because the nuclear deal is stuck. They were looking towards other smaller suppliers from the neighboring African continent, for example, Libya. But Libya has its own problems at this moment. Algeria has already decided not to supply gas to Spain, which is the largest market for it. So given that lack of alternatives at this moment, other Gulf countries are already, whatever they are producing, they are supplying to China and other countries. So there is no alternative at this moment. The Israeli gas, which they signed the deal last week, is not enough. It is maximum it will be able to send is hardly 10% of what Europe needs. It means they will have to find an alternative at this moment, and the only alternative they have is basically switching to something which they wanted to eliminate as soon as possible. As you rightly pointed out, by 2000, Germany has a target of kind of shutting most of its coal-based, coal is still a prominent source of energy in Germany, but they wanted to shut most of its coal-based energy centers because of the environmental politics. They are already on the way of shutting down nuclear plants, power plants. So the renewals which they are looking forward to are not there yet. So in the meantime, they have no other alternative but to shift to coal. It means further deterioration of the global climate concerns.
And also, of course, consumers facing the brunt of that in the European market for sure.
Higher prices.
Higher prices, likely to see perhaps more pressure then on governments in Europe to do more to find longer term solutions to some of these energy and wider concerns. With that, that's all we have on this episode of Daily Debrief for today. For more details on all of these stories, visit our website, peoplesdispatch.org. Also give us a follow on all the regular social media platforms. From Abdul, myself and the entire People's Dispatch team, thank you very much for watching. We'll see you tomorrow. Goodbye.